Chris, my neighbor in West Virginia. Happy Saturday.
Happy Saturday to you.
Thank you for taking time to speak with me. I started thinking about all the questions I wanted to ask you. I think I had 12 pages worth of notes, and so I'm gonna have to trim it down. Uh, yeah, it's going to be a great discussion. I, I think that what comes back to me is across continents and centuries, human beings have long told stories to make sense of the world around them. Their
Right.
shared suffering, their need for belonging, which we all have, that hope for justice and yearning for love. And I feel like today's show is so timely given what's been going on in the world over the last few weeks. But I have a question that I want the audience to ponder before we begin today's podcast. And it's this: in a modern world like ours, that's still fighting over translations or interpretations of ancient myths, is it really so far fetched to think that eh, just maybe all us humans really believe the same eternal truths? So, with that said, I want to get into our conversation. I've got a copy of your book, Legacy. It's fantastic. Wisdom of African Traditions in the Bible. We're going to talk a lot about this book today. One thing that was really impressive to me is this is heavily researched, deep notes and citations. This is a labor of love. This had to have taken you
It
quite a
was
bit of time to put together. Yeah.
about 6, 7 years. Yep.
Yeah. So in this book, Chris places, I think, nearly 300 African proverbs alongside biblical scripture. And that's not to necessarily blur the differences, but to illuminate their similarities. And he talks about from African expressions of the golden rule to loving one's enemies to the wisdom of losing your way and to find your way, and to this really powerful idea of Sankofa, which means to go back and get it. And in that spirit of Sankofa, Chris, this is the story of us. And so we always start with, I want to hear your story. Our audience wants to hear your story. We want to get to know you as a human being before we dive into all the great work that you've been doing. So would you mind sharing your story, where you're from, how you got to where you are today?
I'd love to. Thank you. I grew up in suburban Philadelphia. I was a weird kid. I was a weird kid, and I was lucky to have parents who embraced that and let me do my thing. From an early age, I can't tell you quite why, but I was interested in African cultures. You might remember the Time Life series of books. They had one on civilizations, and each was a short volume, but with heavily illustrated. But like the Age of Reformation, the Age of Kings, and they had one in that series on African kingdoms, and I dove into that, and I loved it. And at age 13, I sent away for records. Remember them?
Sure.
Had teach yourself Swahili. What
Wow.
was I doing? Yeah, and I remember having agreed an elder, Shikamoo Mzee, but and I've joined a Swahili language club at my workplace. So it's the vowels are easy. It's the 7 noun categories that are hard to navigate. But I from an early age, I was just really fascinated, and so that sort of laid the groundwork. I was drawn to public service. I was drawn to like foreign language. French came easy to me. And so as I was entering high school, um, preparing for college, my dad and I thought, great, the foreign service seems like where you should be. Um, so in grad school, I trained for a career that would have aimed for like USAID. I would have gotten doged, or an NGO, or to serve in Africa. And my degree was half public administration, half economic and social development, um, with the aim of supervising projects or helping support projects in Africa, like community projects, wells, health, public health efforts. Um, my life took a different course, but in grad school in Pittsburgh, I met folks from Mali, in West Africa, Nigeria, Tanzania, for the first time. And my eyes were really opened, and I wanted to learn more about those cultures. So at that time, I started collecting compilations of African proverbs. So some of these have sat with me for like 30 years or longer. Uh, th- Through several moves, they've stayed with us. We threw out other things, but I kept these, held on to them. And then about 8, 9 years ago, I came across the series, the parallel sayings of Jesus and series, parallel sayings of Jesus and Moses, Jesus and Muhammad, Jesus and Lao Tzu, and Krishna and Buddha, and they're just they were just really remarkable, and they it gave me a format to work with, and the idea of the book sort of gelled. Then I started out with about a half dozen African proverbs that really reminded me of a verse, scripture verses, and just took off from there. The parallel sayings books are really, I recommend them to anyone interested in. We can talk about them more in a bit if you'd like, but there are uh, there's a for example in Buddhism there's a very similar temptation in the desert scene, almost verbatim.
That's right.
In Taoism, there's a version of the Beatitudes, not verbatim, not literal, but a very similar set of paradoxes about the sage is one who accepts this, that, and the other. So it's just really uh, stimulated my interest in, like, why don't people know this more? I've known it for 30 years, and this is a treasury of wisdom that everyone should have access to. And for some reason, we don't. I did a little research. There's nothing else quite like it. In the early 90s, Archbishop Desmond Tutu issued a book on an African prayer book. And it was a compilation of parables and proverbs and poetry with African themes, not paired with scripture, but a handful of proverbs, but meant to enrich, a Christian's understanding, because he was like the foremost advocate of integrating indigenous and African and Christian, themes. Um, so I started with about a half dozen. I got into it and then realized, because I obviously I didn't grow up with in these traditions. I didn't know very much about them, but um, I realized I'd need some help. So I reached out to and eventually recruited about 30 African contributors who I name in the book and quote, or um, to help walk me through the proverbs. Are these proverbs really from your culture? And in some cases, when they said no, I don't recognize this, I dropped them. Um, what's the context? Is it used with children? And are there any translation issues that would enrich our understanding in English? And there was such a generous outpouring of support for the project. Uh, people people signed up and were like, "Here's some more proverbs for you. Here's some more verses." They thought there was such tremendous support for the project. I was limited by my publisher in terms of the external text that I could use, and
Okay.
there had to be so much original text to support that. So I couldn't accept all their changes, but I welcomed their participation. And in the recruitment process, they'd say, "Well, I have access to the National Library." Oh, great, you're in. Another would say, "I have access to the royal family." Great, perfect. And one young woman said, "I have access to rural women." And I'm like, "You are definitely going to be
You're
part of the
in.
team." So, and I used not they don't represent all the cultures in the book. There were just too many, but they represent some significant cultures, some of the major ones. And in those cases, I use more than one to get different perspectives on. So as you said, it was a labor of love, and I recruited artists from all over the world as well. So you know, I hope it stimulates some thinking.
I think it definitely can stimulate some thinking. Going back to your childhood, were the teachings in your upbringing that made you did they make you sensitive to interconnection across traditions? Were you raised in a very religious family?
No,
You were not.
no.
So you were ancillary to Christianity because you understand Christianity pretty well. Books of the Bible, things of that nature. How did you connect the dots here?
I began exploring that as an adult.
Oh, I see.
I'm not exactly sure of what my parents' religious affiliations were, but I grew up fairly secular, but open to um, traditions from all over the world. So I didn't have a sense of barrier, or I'm not allowed to do this, or you know,
Yeah.
what am I thinking? How dare I? But so that was something I'm very grateful to my parents for.
Tell us a little bit more about your parents if you don't mind. What were they like? What did they do
Well,
for a living as you were growing up?
they were theater people.
Theater people in Pittsburgh.
Yeah,
Yeah.
my dad was a professor of speech communication and theater. My mom was a quasi professional actress, was a member of Equity for a while, had a radio show for a while. Um, um, they were they were practiced in sort of, I think, what theater gives you, and I inherited some of that, but not I'm not as good as they were. But you get to look at the world through different lenses, through different
Mhm.
roles, and you try to imagine what it's like to be in someone else's shoes, to create a character. Um, so that may have played a small part in this, but they were open minded. They were both feminists. They marched for women's rights. Um, and they supported me no matter what, no matter what. And
That's great.
I'm so grateful to them. And my dad was like, it was my dad's idea to the professional pathway he envisioned for me. God bless him. It didn't work out that way. I'm happy with my life the way it turned out. But who knew that all this would lay dormant and then finally explode and congeal in the book.
And it's one thing to have a bunch of ideas. It's another thing to go on a mission, really not as a professional author, to be able to go and say, I have a book. I'm going to create this book. I'm going to get this book published, printed, and out into the community. Was that a difficult journey? How did that come about?
Um, well, I I went to it's my first and only book. I don't envision another one, but I went to four traditional publishers first, and crickets from a three, and a clear, definite no from the fourth. You know, so um, maybe with holy boldness or just plain old human boldness, I'll do it. I'll do it. So I learned about self-publishing and the pitfalls and pros and cons of that. It's not necessarily for everyone, but if you have a clear idea of what you have to say, where you want to go, and you have the resources, great. That's an opportunity. And I attended a workshop on uh, 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 the business of writing for spiritual writers, which was very helpful. So here we
That's
are.
wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to include you now as one of my major influences because, those 2 of the people that were really influential to me starting this podcast and my website and blog that I call the Story of Us Project are Joseph Campbell and Thich Nhat Hanh, and I don't know if you're familiar with the writings of either one of them, but
Absolutely.
Thich Nhat Hanh has a book that is very similar in parallel sayings, really
Yes.
diving deep into the story, the legend, and the symbolism and teachings of Jesus and those with the Buddha. All the way you
Living Buddha,
mentioned
Living Christ. I'm sorry.
the
Yeah, I've
Living
read it.
Buddha, Living Christ.
I
That's right.
love the
That's
book.
a
I love that
wonderful
book.
book, and that book kicked me off. I got somehow introduced to Joseph Campbell and his concept of the monomyth, and that's really when the light bulbs came on for me.
Yes.
The fact that some of us have probably heard of the hero's journey in middle school English, but that echoes through every culture's storytelling since the emergence of man. whether it's the Egyptians to the Knights of the Round Table or from South America to Southeast Asia and beyond. And the book that I'm currently reading right now that I stumbled on, a little deep, it's a big book, but I kept being told that I really needed to read James Frazier and his legendary book, The Golden Bough. Now, this one's unusual, but it suggests to us that ancient humanity progressed steadily from superstition and magic to religion to science and then to ultimately technology, each being an attempt to better understand the same mystery of life that all humans have been trying to figure out since the beginning of time, but from different angles. And I think that your book lands squarely within those influences. This is taking the same idea of interconnectedness, of the monomyth, the same story being told over different centuries and different cultures, but it applies this forgotten knowledge of the African continent and traditional African proverb. And so it has a beautiful way of blending right in with those. And so I hope your book is a tremendous success.
Oh, sure.
It's been influential on me.
Thank you.
So, do you mind if I ask some deeper questions around the book? I really
I'd
want to
love
kind of
to.
get yeah. So you compared nearly 300 of these proverbs with biblical verses. What surprised you the most in the parallels that you found?
Um, it was pretty amazing. There were there are beautiful uses of metaphor and paradox. Um, for example, compassion is a well, a Swahili proverb. What does that
Compassion is
mean?
a
Is a
well.
well that the whole community can draw from, that is available to all, that is self-replenishing, right? I imagine it doesn't say that. It ends with compassion is a well. Um, but you can imagine what it may have meant to speakers, to the community. That's a beautiful metaphor for a way of thinking about compassion. Um, um, the African American writer Toni Morrison has commented that like Western stories have a sort of a just so ending, and that's the way it is. And she points out that African stories are kind of more open ended, and I think that applies to the proverbs as well. It's like, how do you apply them in this situation? What are all its possible meanings? So the metaphors, the paradoxes really help instill that. They sort of embed themselves into your soul. Um, Another one, you said paradox. The wealth that enslaves is not wealth. The
Ooh,
wealth
I
that
like that one.
enslaves. It's about things owning you,
Yeah,
right? That's
like our
your
like my iPhone,
yeah,
right?
right, exactly. So it's like, and that was that's just so profoundly true, and yet I love it's a beautiful use of paradox. And you pointed out one a few minutes ago. There are like the Swahili and Sakuma peoples in Tanzania have similar proverbs. Losing the way is one way of finding it, which is almost a koan. It's a paradox about um, patience, trusting. It's letting your mistakes be your teacher, to learn the landscape as you are finding your way. You have lost your way, but you're finding it. You trust that you're finding your way. Um, there are arresting constructions. Um, uh, there's a beautiful proverb from the Ovambo in Namibia. Um, Eyes see me too. Eyes see
I see
me
me too.
too. Which is exactly the idea of seeing the beam in your own eye, not focusing on on the motes in someone else's. See me too.
Mm.
It's a really arresting construction, because it's a command. It's an imperative to your to your own eyes. Eyes see me. I mean, that is really striking and vivid. Um, but also, I mean, so there was just the structure of the different proverbs and how they present. Um, there are also like glimpses into, uh, in a few cases, another religion. I mentioned a few Swahili proverbs. The Swahili were traditionally Muslim. Today, there are Swahili Christians, but there's um, a proverb that sort of reveals um, Muslim influence. There are a few of those in the book. Prayer is not closing the eyes and prostrating. Prayer is in the heart.
Mm.
But pr- clo- prostrating and closing your eyes are exactly the way to do Muslim prayer. That is the standard way of doing practicing
Wh-
Muslim prayer like 5 times a day.
when you see contrasts like that, do you think that there's a chance that the proverb was influenced later by another religion? So some of these are really similar, but some of them contrast almost as a point counterpoint with something else that maybe they had crossed over, like this Muslim idea of, you know, prostrating to Mecca or whatever the case.
Right.
That's one question, and I think the deeper question is this book must have been very challenging because you're comparing a written word to almost a spoken word that's handed down over centuries and centuries. And so, was it hard to determine which came first? Because a lot of these African cultures have been influenced by Islam, Christianity, etc. And it probably had to be hard to unwind, or maybe that's not even the point of unwinding. Which came first? Was it the proverb that influenced the Christian thinking that came along? Because let's remember, we believe that all of the human race originated from the continent of Africa and expanded across the globe. That the first humans, the first Homo sapiens, were there in Africa and then extended beyond. So it had to be difficult to determine, even if you needed to, which one influenced the other.
That's an excellent question, and it was beyond the scope of the book. It was, it's fairly challenging with working with material that was originally oral.
Sure.
To date it and then to look at influences, you can see very similar proverbs in different countries and different cultures. So proverbs do, jump cultural boundaries. It's quite possible. Um, in terms of detecting influences, there was a similar proverb about prayer in the heart, but from a completely different perspective, from Ethiopia, a, a historically Christian country
Hmm.
with an indigenous writing tradition. That was not necessarily the case in other African cultures. Uh, King Azana of Aksum was among the earliest monarchs in AD 600 to convert to Christianity. So long Christian tradition there. Um, Singing hallelujah everywhere does not prove piety.
Singing hallelujah
Singing hallelujah
everywhere
everywhere
does not prove
prove
proprietary.
piety.
Piety. Oh, okay. So, that one really hits for me because
Yes.
I think that's one that us modern humans grapple with is
Oh yeah.
just because I go to church or I identify in this classification of religion doesn't necessarily mean because I go to church and I sing the hymns and I do the things that I ritually should do doesn't necessarily make me closer to God or any more different than you or I.
Right. I love that one because it's like parading your piety is meaningless. And it accords so perfectly with Jesus's admonition to pray privately.
Yeah.
Don't desire to be seen in the marketplace. And that's exactly the same idea behind singing Hallelujah does not propriety. That's the same idea I think behind um, um, the Swahili proverb about prayer being in the heart, not not in your outward actions, not in how you wish to be seen, right? So it was interesting to get the same insight from different religious traditions. I don't know if they influence each other, but the one from Ethiopia, whether it was influenced by Jesus's admonition to pray privately, I don't know. I mean, it's possible given the long Christian history of that country, and where there are clear relationships or potential relation or influences. I acknowledge that, but in other cases, like the eyes see me too. The construction of that is so different, so striking from worry about the mote in your own eye, and it's so like thousands of miles separate from the Holy Land. It's almost certainly an indigenous formulation of that insight, that idea.
Even more than the parallel sayings, your book, describing these ancient African proverbs really seems to hit home this idea that we're all saying the same thing. We're all fundamentally at the source, all humans. We all tend to believe the very similar things. And one of them that you spend some time on in the book is the golden rule, the one that from very beginning, anyone who is anywhere near the Christian faith hears about the golden rule as a child. And now what you did is you took these 300 or so proverbs and you did a really nice job of
Oh, thank you.
categorizing them into themes. And one
Yep.
of those themes is the golden rule across different civilizations. You highlight African
African
expressions of
expression.
the golden rule. Do you think this ethic emerges independently in cultures, or does it point to something deeper in the human conscious? And well, before that, maybe remind the audience of what is the golden rule and what are these versions in the African proverbs of the golden rule?
Sure. The golden rule is simple. It's Jesus: do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Okay, a beautiful, fundamental expression of how you should treat others. Um, and the, I don't know if you've seen in a church or other house of worship, there's a poster with versions of the golden rule in different religious
Mm.
traditions. One of the most famous, just beautiful formulation by Hillel, the Jewish scholar: that which is hateful to you, do not do unto others. That is the whole of Torah. The the Go study. The rest is commentary. Go study. Um, so it's a negative formulation. That which is hateful to you, don't do. Um, and in I cite one book that found examples of the golden rule. By the way, that poster with all the different versions, you
Yeah.
can find them in like it cites the golden rule in Buddhism and Hinduism, in smaller traditions like Jainism. Okay, which is lovely, but you won't find on that poster the African versions, which always just sort of irritated me. Like, why is that? But so this I found this book that claims to have found 26 versions of the golden rule in 26 other faith traditions around the world. Looking up and going to the end notes of that book, that also leaves out the African versions.
Did you ever
I,
figure out, or do you have suspicion of why
I
the
have
African versions have been left out of the discussion?
well, let me give you some examples of the one in particular that I found. I'm sure I missed a few, but I found at least 7 African expressions of the golden rule. One is beautiful. It's from Madagascar. It's um, if you know what hurts yourself, you know what hurts others.
Mm.
The same idea, that's expressed a little differently, different flavor. If you know what hurts yourself, it's the same exercise of the imagination as to of how it would feel to another person. The same concept.
Yeah.
My one of my Malagasy uh, contributors said, her name was Melody Ramanandra. I love that name. Um, um, she said the word in Malagasy is pinch, right? and this one is used with children, which to me, once I heard that, I hear the proverb as a mother's warning. Don't pinch somebody. You know what a pinch feels like.
Mhm.
That's exactly what it sounded like to me.
Yeah.
But it's still, and so many of these are used with children because you're trying to shape them and prepare them for life. Um, but it's another expression of the golden rule. It's a beautiful one. Um, and I mean, and there are others, and I don't know why. I mean, I just felt like we should. Why don't we know this? Why don't we all know more about this? Um, your excellent question is like, why might, why is it the case that we don't know more about these? And I wondered, is it sort of preference for comparing written tradition to written tradition,
Okay.
dismissing, relegating proverbs to, oh, that's just folklore, you know, you know, if it's not written. That might play a part, to be honest. Um, is it because they're not per se religious?
Okay.
You can read these proverbs, enjoy these proverbs, share these proverbs without, as a Christian, as a Muslim, as a Jewish person, or as a person of no particular religion. Most of these proverbs don't are not associated with a specific religion or
Yeah, but
religious
to me,
tradition.
that's the magic of it.
Is that? Is that?
It is.
But in traditional African cultures, as in many traditional cultures around the world, um, religion was not relegated to a separate part of life, a separate domain. It it was integrated into everything. So that it goes without saying, and that's why a lot of these proverbs are compatible. I mean, they're used today, according to my African contributors. Um, or or you can't discount racism. This is not a book about racism, but you can't deny the potential role there. I mean, we're just like 50 years away from, excuse me, cannibal cartoons
Right.
in that, right, in nationwide publications. We're less than 100 years away from minstrelsy, which caricatured Africans and African Americans in cartoonish ways I won't repeat, but that just sort of uh, conveyed the notion that there was nothing to be learned from such people.
Yeah, and I think that's what I was thinking too, is that all of those points you make are great, but foundationally at the heart of it, maybe it's this idea of aboriginals or these ancient bush cultures. I don't even know the words that I'm going for here. There's nothing to learn from them. They are to learn from us. But in reality, we're saying the same stuff.
Exactly, exactly. But the result was that there was this sort of invisible wall where we this notion that there was nothing to learn on the other side from these other traditions was just embedded, was taken for granted, was never questioned. And I mean, if there was something similar happened in African cultures themselves. There's a Kenyan scholar, Ngugi wa Thiong'o, I hope I said that right. He describes a culture bomb, metaphorical, going off, set off by each colonial power, it- conveying the message to Africans themselves that nothing of value happened before we came, right?
Right.
Which might explain the enthusiasm of some of my African contributors. Like this is great that you're doing this. Um,
Chris, I
uh,
have a book idea for you. You said you're not going to write another book.
please.
Maybe we could collaborate, but as we talk about this and we talk about why these African proverbs have been, I'm not going to say buried, but unearthed over all of these years, and it took your work to do that, I feel there's a parallel with the Native American culture as well. And I think that it's probably similar if somebody had an interest in that, which I do. Maybe I could collaborate with you on a book about the similarities in Native American spoken word wisdom and some of the religions, because that's probably the other group that has not been unearthed so much as I don't think we have anything to learn from these people. We are here to change these people and enlighten them and bring them out from the dark into the light when really they've been living in the light
Yeah,
this whole time.
well said. Well said. I think there's some potential there. I'm not sure I'm the best person to partner in that. But I suggest one thing to you. There's a great Billy Mills, who's Lakota, has a great poem about Wakatanka, the great mystery god,
Mhm.
and Iktomi, the trickster.
Right.
Look it up.
Okay.
It's a great, I sought, my, I sought this, but God gave me that.
Oh, I love it. I wanna ask you specifically about the concept of Sankofa because you mentioned that in your introduction. I think it weaves throughout the book, and I think it is so relevant to today's culture, this idea of go back and get it. It seems to me that these generations that have lived and grown up since the 70s, 80s, 90s, we tend to confuse information with wisdom.
Mm,
Information and wisdom are far different things. So, can you tell a little bit more about this concept of Sankofa? It feels deeply relevant today. What are the Proverbs asking us to retrieve from the past?
right. Sankofa literally is an Akan that's a culture from Ghana in West Africa. Literally means go back and get it. Um, and the idea, and it's often portrayed the symbol of a backwards looking bird, with the idea that in order to move forward, we have to look backward. We have to look to the past. Now, my one of my African contributors who had relatives in Ghana said, "Oh, this is used sometimes when you forget your keys and go back and get them." So it might be over spiritualized to some degree, but there's a lot of value in like go back and explore these wisdom traditions and see how you can apply them today. I think that's just so beautiful. That it
Y-
is so and you make an excellent point that with data centers and there is this notion that information is the be all and end all, but great, that's going to be helpful, but it's really wisdom that will keep us moving forward.
Wisdom is learned through experience. It's passed down from generation to generation. It's very human. There's an emotional
Exactly.
element to wisdom.
Exactly.
It is much easier for everyone to understand. Information is just digested. It's just
Right. Right.
it's just memorized.
Right.
But wisdom is something that is hard earned. And I think our modern society suffers from historical amnesia. There's no doubt about it. We've lost the wisdom of the elder that was passed down through generations of storytelling. But have the African cultures, have you had a chance to figure out have do they have the same historical amnesia? Or in modern day Africa and most of these places, are these proverbs still part of everyday life? Or are they suffering from some of the similar challenges that we are as modern humans?
Both. I heard from my African contributors that there are challenges with modern media and children's attention, the same that we're experiencing here. But these are surviving traditions. They're still being used, and that's a key element. It's a community endeavor to participate in and pass on the proverbs. Um, I'm told that African diplomats in reaching agreements will often cite proverbs as a way to express solidarity and convey hope for the agreement that they're signing. So you know, I hope they survive. And I had a one of my African friends, contributors, said that she feels lucky that she grew up in a culture that was surrounded by proverbs. It becomes part of your mental landscape. And
Right.
sometimes, part of the literal landscape I mentioned Adinkra, I think. They're designs in the Khan culture of Ghana, um, that convey different ideas, and they can be stamped on clothing, painted on walls, incorporated into hair designs, and so it becomes literally a part of your actual landscape, and not just your mental landscape. You grow up with these, and
Yeah.
right,
Yeah, it's fascinating. One of the things that I love about the African proverbs is they're so poetic in nature, and what I think I mean by poetic is poets can take a paragraph or a book-long idea and distill it down into 5 words. None of these proverbs are long, and most
right.
of these proverbs you cite in this book, there's almost 300 of them, and I would say the longest one might have 7 words in it. But the words are so powerful, each one chosen specifically to convey a message and emotion that can resonate with individuals. And you said it earlier, it really is fascinating when we were talking about the golden rule. You said something that I'm going to take in my pocket and take with me. And that
Oh,
was this idea that once you understand the golden rule, you pretty much know just about everything there is to know about all the religions that are out there. The rest of it is just conversation. It's
commentary, right?
commentary,
You wrote it
right?
well. Yeah,
I love that.
I love
Now
that.
there's
But don't study is the very Jewish. Keep learning.
yeah, that's right, but it's just kinda I think it's also like how we perceive diet and nutrition. I know that's a stretch, but in the end, it all kinda comes down to, um, eat fruits and vegetables and get a little bit of exercise and go to sleep, and we've overcomplicated it. Can we just remember to eat some more fruits and vegetables and get plenty of sleep and get a little bit of exercise, see the sunlight in your eyes? Over time, these things have gotten so complicated that it is so empowering to just go back to the source, back to the root, to those 5, 6, 7 words, and they lead you to where you need to be led.
That's an excellent point. I didn't count the number of words in all of them, but the shortest proverb in the book is 2 words. It's a Swahili proverb about anger. Anger, loss,
Hmm,
which I pair with Paul's "In your anger, do not sin." It's like, acknowledge the anger, but be aware that it can lead to loss, and practice self-control so that you don't inflict a lot more loss than necessary on yourself and on others. In 2 words. In 2 words.
wow,
The other, and the beauty is that in Swahili, the second word loss can also mean damage, and it works that way too, anger, damage. Be careful of the
wow.
damage you might cause.
Anger, loss, anger, damage.
Yeah, and in
2 words.
Swahili, yeah, and it's still 2 words in Swahili, but it's hasira hasara. So you lose some rhythm, you lose some alliteration, but it's equally powerful in English. It doesn't
It
lose
reminds
any.
me almost of yin and yang. It's feels
Well,
very
it's
similar.
the emphasis on is on brevity because so often, and they've been developed to be memorable,
Because they're
right?
spoken word, carried down from generation to
Because
generation and not written.
in predominantly oral cultures, that's how you pass it on. So many are used with children. Um, it, it's and so you have these distilled drops of wisdom, these gems that say so much in such an economical way.
Yeah, your book came to me at just the right moment,
Oh, really?
Chris. It really did, and I think it's back to that "seek and ye shall find" kinda idea about life. My wife and I joke about it and say, you're looking for a car and you're shopping to buy a new car, and suddenly you see them all over the street, right? I stumbled on African proverbs very recently watching the opening ceremonies of the Winter Olympics.
Oh, did you?
And I was, casually watching, probably flipping through my phone while the TV was on. And the head of the Olympic Committee stood in front of the entire world and they said a word that got my attention and wanted me to learn more. And they cited Ubuntu in the opening ceremonies of the Winter Olympics. And Ubuntu tells us, I am because we are. And this feels like one of the most powerful African proverbs as it relates to the interconnectedness of all human beings on earth. Do African proverbs across the board assume this interconnection as a starting point for us to understand one another?
One of my African contributors, Zulu speaker, Tobilium Kize, I got that right, but says that the idea of Ubuntu was embedded in Southern Bantu cultures, and it really just means the humanity, because uh, the NTU part means human, and the prefix "u" is creates an abstraction. So it's humanity, but it in the larger sense of as you said, I am because we are, oh, and we are because I am. It's about the relationship of the individual to the community, and as you said, the interconnectedness. It's just other African cultures have a similar concept. In Madagascar, it's called fihavanana. Love the sound of that word. A very sacred bond among all beings. Um, um, and the Malagasy proverb I use: um, "All who live under the sky are woven together like one big mat."
Ooh. These are so beautiful, Chris.
Thank you. I'm
I
so
know you
glad they.
didn't write them, but they
No,
just
I
roll
didn't.
off the
I didn't.
tongue.
I can't claim any originality here, but um, and it's my African contributor Melody Ramanandra said this is the mat they would sit on in the evening while weaving or talking, and it just immediately brought to mind um, um, King's comment about we're all woven together in a single garment of destiny. I don't know. I don't presume that he knew about the proverb, but it gets to the same idea, and as we said, Archbishop Desmond Tutu has been a foremost proponent of Ubuntu and integrating that into Christian practice. And he said that a person with Ubuntu is not threatened by others with a strong sense of themselves. I'm paraphrasing. Uh, Again, King said, "I cannot be what I am meant to be unless you are what you are meant to be. You cannot be what you are meant to be until I am what I'm meant to be." And Howard Thurman, another African American theologian, said something similar: "Human life is one, and all men are members of each other." I think it's no coincidence that African American theologians retained this sense of community over the centuries and and remain proponents and explicators of it and remind us how important it is. Because I think in modern American Christianity, we sometimes forget, we don't hear, partly because of language, the you plural in the Old Testament and in so many of Paul's letters. We hear I, me, and I think it's a useful corrective to remember
I do
we're all
too.
in this together.
We are all in this together. What connects us and our similarities are far greater than what divides us and makes us unique. There's very little difference scientifically between the DNA in me and in you. It might be a
Absolutely,
quarter
absolutely,
of a percent
absolutely.
of what's there. It makes me wonder what would change in modern culture if Ubuntu were understood or taken seriously by most people. And it
That's
leads me to a kind of deeper question, and I'm interested in your thoughts here. Because of people like you, is the work of our time, our generation, our modern life less about conversion, which is the way that we've tried to distill our ideas on other people across the world for centuries? Is it less about conversion and more about recognition?
Great question. I'm was so fortunate to have a forward to the book by Therese Taylor Stinson, who wrote "Walking the Way of Harriet Tubman, Public Mystic and Freedom Fighter." Um, by the way, Harriet Tubman had visions. She was a mystic, and there's never been a more tenacious freedom fighter in our history. Um, and I invited her to. I asked her would she write up before, and she said yes. And she said it just struck me that the work seemed to her like a work of reconciliation.
Mm, yeah, and she wrote a very a beautiful introduction to your book.
Yes, yes.
After I read the introduction, I had to look up, "Well, who was that?" That was that was great.
Thank you for taking the
That
time to do
was
that. I
great.
recommend her book as well, but she was careful to follow that with, but for African Americans, there was no conciliation in the first place.
Right, right. Chris, I could talk to you all day, and we're nearing the 50-minute mark. It's been remarkable. I'm such a big fan. I'm fangirling out on today's show because you're just too cool. There's two questions I ask all my guests, and so I'm going to ask them of you. And the first one is back to your origin story, to you as a person, the story of Chris Morehouse. If you could whisper something to a younger version of yourself, a younger Chris, maybe that was the 13-year-old Chris that first stumbled on an excitement and interest over African culture, or it was a pivotal point in your life. You could have been 5, 15, 20, it doesn't matter, but you pick. Is there something that you want to tell that younger version of Chris?
Thank you. I think what it comes down to for me is that, um, we can't afford division. The price is too high. It's like, King said, I will not practice hate." Um, we're confronting very serious questions, and we of climate change, of future possible pandemics, other issues that require us to work together. We're not over. We're not in our own little private individual pods. We have to come together. There's no more them and us. It's only us.
Yeah, my younger version would want to hear that too. Now, switching gears, the alternate to that, one of the reasons I started the podcast was for my family, for
Oh,
my children, and for my eventual grandchildren. Not there yet, but
no.
it's coming probably sooner than I wanted to. You're going to get to hear this. This is going to be recorded. We'll put it out on the World Wide Web for eternity. It'll be living in the cloud or wherever data and video goes. But 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, you'll get the chance to go back and hear this. And I want to know, is there something you want to tell that future version of Chris that he might
Oh,
need to hear from Chris today?
wow. Wow. Just keep at it. Don't give up. Don't be afraid to take your time. During the while I was writing the book, I felt this urgency, like I got to get this out. I don't know why. I'm like I'm old. I don't have that much time. I maybe I exaggerate, but I just felt this urgency, and it might be like it was just too important to let go of. Um, uh, I might have taken my time. I've since thought about 5 or 6 things I might add to it, not change the message, but just more detail. And what I would love to do, if this future Chris can accomplish it, is uh, do some translation. Have Because I worked with uh, potential translators into French, Portuguese, and Spanish for Latin America, but also there's a tiny part of Africa that speaks Spanish for all the primary European official European languages of Africa. And I was told that those folks told me in their cultures this did not exist. You can't find it. It's the
Right.
same kind of erasure, and it would be of such benefit to get other versions of this out there.
I think my daughter told me she's a Spanish major at the University of Tennessee in Knoxville, so go Vols, I guess. But she told
I
me that is this tiny portion of Africa that speaks Spanish, is it Equatorial
It is
New
Equatorial
okay.
Guinea. Yeah.
Yeah. She got stuck with having to make a presentation on that, and she didn't like it too much. She didn't like it too much. Chris, thank you so much. Because of the work of people like you, I think these stories and traditions and proverbs are going to continue. The torch is going to be passed because of the work that you have done. And I'm just very blessed that you did. I think today, what I learned most was that across Africa and ancient Israel, across proverb and parable, across myth and scripture, we keep hearing the same melody in different keys. Love your neighbor, welcome the stranger, use your life to find it. So maybe the deeper story isn't about who's right and who's wrong. Maybe it's about what keeps repeating. And here are three questions that I think are the mic drop moment of our conversation. Number one, what if the world's religions are not competing origin stories, but variations of a single human awakening? What if the golden rule isn't borrowed, it's remembered? And what if the real tragedy of our time is not that we disagree with each other, but that we've forgotten how deeply we already agree?
I think that's interesting. You're probably familiar with the Greek myth of the Procrustean bed. Like there was an
Mm.
innkeeper who would stretch his guests if they were too tall for their bed, or chop them their body parts off if they were um, too long for it. So you don't want to. The point being, you want to respect the integrity of the traditions you're interested in. You don't want to contort them
Yeah.
to be
Eh,
all the same. But without saying they're all the same, there are some amazing points of convergence that we should all be aware of. In Proverbs 8 in the Bible, we meet Lady Wisdom, a personified female embodiment of wisdom, who says she was there from the beginning with God, right? I stand at the city gate. I have words of truth on my lips, and she says, "Those who find me find life, and those who fail to find me will harm themselves." In other words, you're going to learn the hard way. And I right, right, and I think that is something that can characterize um, all these international convergences that you're pointing out. And I'm so grateful it spoke to you because I'm like, wow, this is a legacy for everybody, particularly
wisdom. w-
especially for African Americans. Yes, but if it speaks to me like a middle class white kid from the suburbs of Philadelphia,
It should
it can
speak to
speak to
all
me.
of us. Wisdom
Yes,
itself is communal. It's not owned. It's not, shouldn't
yes,
be
yes,
weaponized. It's not tribal. It's
right,
shared.
right,
And what binds us is older than what divides us. I think the task isn't to defend our version of what the story should be, but recognize ourselves in one another as we tell those ancient stories.
absolutely,
This podcast is called The Story of Us, from cosmic dawn to the depths of being, meaning that we all were born out of the same stardust explosions. And to our very core, to our very being, we're all in this together. So, Chris, thanks
uh,
for joining me on The Story of Us. It's been a fantastic hour, and I really appreciate your time.
it was a joy. I mean it. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Chris, peace be with you, my brother.
You as well. Take care. Thank you.
Yeah.